There is a very popular quote that says, "The path to our destination is often not a straight one." And this was certainly the case for me in my transition to the medical field. If you're new here, hi, my name is Ebu, and I'm a second year medical student, software engineer, and author. After spending about 7 years in the tech industry, I transitioned from being a full time software engineer to now being a medical student with the hopes of one day becoming a medical doctor. And a lot of people have asked me of what that process was like and the things that I did to make my transition somewhat seamless. So I hope that this video can answer some of those questions. In this video, I'll be walking through all the steps that I took as a non-traditional medical school applicant in transitioning from tech to medicine. I'll give a quick backstory of my academic background and the things I did during my undergrad and my gap years to make my transition smooth. If you are also a non-traditional applicant in the sense of having a different career path, or you graduated from school a long time ago in a different field and you feel drawn to a career in medicine, I hope that this video can steer you in the right direction in pursuing that path. So without further ado, let's get started. So, for my background story, I am Nigerian by birth, but I moved to Canada when I was 16 years old and I attended university. That is my first degree in Canada. When I was picking what program to do for my first degree, bearing in mind that I had this desire to be a doctor one day, I did something unusual. I decided that for my first degree, I was going to pick a program that was unrelated to medicine because I thought to myself, what if one day I wake up and I decide I just hate the sight of blood? I don't want to do anything medical related. I wanted to have a degree in a completely different field from medicine. I know it might seem like a silly reason, but that's what I was thinking at the age of 16. And so I picked computer science. And the reason I had picked computer science also was because I wanted to study something that was relevant to the times we were in. At that time, technology was fast advancing, and it was very clear that computer science, software engineering, and the field of tech was booming and it was the in thing. And so I decided that that was what I was going to study as my first degree. And side note, I was surrounded by a lot of people who were either studying computer science, software engineering, or working in tech, aka my dad. My dad has worked in tech all my life, so I just figured if I needed help, I could get help from him. So during my undergrad, I figured that if I was eventually going to get into medical school, I needed to take the prerequisite courses. Typically in North America, where I live, so Canada, the US, I guess some other countries, in order to get into medical school after having a degree, you need to have taken some prerequisite courses in the sciences. So things like biology, chemistry, organic chemistry, biochem, physics, and all of that stuff. So while I was doing my undergrad, I decided that I would take these courses as electives. However, I discovered that because of the program that I was enrolled in, that is honors in computer science, I was blocked from taking those pure science courses. So after a lot of thought and deliberation and just reading through the fine print, I decided to switch my program from an honors in computer science to a specialization in biomedical computing. Now, with this specialization, it allowed me to take the pure science courses that I needed. So I made this switch after my third year in university. I was in a 5 year program, 4 years of studies and 1 year of co op. So instead of being enrolled in just a computer science honors program, I decided to attach the specialization in biomedical computing. Not because I wanted to work in a biomedical computing firm, but because I needed to take the prerequisite courses while I was in university. So that was my strategy for taking off the prerequisite courses requirement to get into medical school. If you know that you want to pursue medicine eventually and you're currently still doing your undergrad or currently in university for a different program, my biggest advice would be try to take the prerequisite courses while you're doing your undergrad, while you're in that program, while you're already in the school mode, because that way you are essentially using one stone to kill two birds. So you get your degree, you get your prerequisite courses. It'll even be better if you're already in a program where these courses are actually part of your curriculum, part of your coursework. You don't have to do much aside from that. If you're already done with your undergrad, your first degree, second degree, master's, all of that stuff, and you didn't get the chance to take the prerequisite courses, that's not the end of the road, because you can still go back to school as a special student or in a community college and enroll to take these courses. So, something I failed to mention was that during my undergrad, the only pure science course that I was not able to take was physics. And so in 2023, I went back to university and enrolled as a special student in the school where I did my undergrad just for physics. So the classes and the labs. And I did this because I noticed that while physics was not a requirement for some medical schools, a lot of the schools that I was trying to apply to had physics as a requirement. And so it exempted me from applying to those schools. And I just didn't like that. I wanted as many options as possible. So I went back to school for that. And so that's also an option if you are done with your undergrad or you're done with your other degrees and you never got the chance to take the prerequisite courses that are required to get into medical school. But here's a good thing that I actually noticed. A lot of schools are moving away from this requirement and they're now calling it recommended courses. So if you're in the process of applying to medical school and maybe you haven't taken the prerequisite courses and you don't want to go back to school just for those, I'd say look out for schools where this is no longer a requirement, rather a recommendation. In my opinion, I would advise that you still take these courses because what I found after completing my first year of medical school is that a lot of the foundational knowledge that you learn in your first year of medical school builds off of the science knowledge from these prerequisite courses. And it makes your life a lot easier and you understand better when you already have that background knowledge from previous studies. So, yeah, the first thing that I did in my transition from tech to medicine was ensuring that I had taken the prerequisite courses. And while we're on this topic of school and all of that, one thing I want to stress is that your GPA is very important. If I were to give it a number on a 4.0 scale, I would say aim for something from 3.5, 3.6 above, because it just gives you a better chance of getting into your choice schools. Although the system is largely unpredictable, but at least you have a better chance of getting into good schools if your GPA is high. So please don't joke with that. I know in university they like to say, oh, your first year doesn't matter, your second year doesn't matter. Trust me, it does. You don't want to be playing catch up in your third and fourth year to try and fix your GPA when it could have just been much easier for you. So please make sure that you have a good enough GPA. What I've seen is that a lot of people actually go and get a second degree or a master's degree to help boost their GPA before applying to medical school. If that's the case, if you really want to do it, if you need it, maybe it's a path that you need to consider. Now, the next big thing that I needed to tackle was the MCAT, the Medical College Admissions Test. It is a 7-hour exam that is often used by lots of schools in North America, Australia, the Caribbeans, and sometimes the UK. Although they have their version, I think it's called the UK CAT or GAMSAT. I'm not really sure what it's called, but I know that some of the schools in the UK will take the MCAT if you have that. But anyways, back to the MCAT. It is a standardized test that a lot of schools have as an admission requirement for their applicants. It is about 7 hours long and it tests your knowledge of subjects like biology, chemistry, physics, organic chemistry, sociology, psychology, and just critical thinking and analysis. What do I have to say about the MCAT? You have to be prepared. When people want to take the MCAT, they usually take one of two paths. Some people either do a self-study or some people take a prep class. Because I was working full-time and my schedule just didn't align with the prep courses, I decided to self-study. So what I did was I gave myself a study period of 6 months to prepare for the MCAT. My preparation involved a lot of reading and studying, watching videos, using things like YouTube and Khan Academy as study materials alongside textbooks. And then I also did a lot of practice tests, short ones, flashcards, full length practice tests, you name it, I did it. I took the MCAT at a time where I had been out of school for about 3 years. So I basically had to learn everything from scratch. And because I had this in mind, I decided that I was going to pace myself. I know some people take 3 months to study for the MCAT, some people take 2 months. It varies from person to person, but you just have to know yourself and know how much time you need to prepare. Because this exam is not something that you should go in unprepared for. It's expensive to register for, it's time consuming, it requires a lot of your brain cells. So you have to go in prepared. So personally, I used a mixture of study materials. Like I mentioned earlier, I used Khan Academy. They have a really great MCAT module and it's free. And I just want to pause and say thank you so much to Khan Academy for helping me even through my undergrad with all my other courses, but especially in preparing for the MCAT. Anyway, I also used YouTube. Honestly, I'm a student of the University of YouTube. so many free resources, so many videos where people just explain things in different words that help you understand better. I also used Kaplan textbooks. I got a subscription to UWorld, which is basically a question bank. I also purchased full-length practice tests from the AAMC's website. I used flashcards, both physical and digital, so I made my own flashcards after studying. And then I also used Anki, which is a digital flashcard app that you can install on your phone, your iPad, your laptop, depending on what you want. I actually still use Anki till this day in medical school. I find it so helpful. Those were the materials that I used to prep for the MCAT. So because I was still working full time while taking the MCAT, I had to be really diligent with my time. This was the most difficult part for me because on most days it felt like there weren't enough hours in the day for me to basically switch from my tech brain and working all day, talking to colleagues and all of that, to now getting into student mode. But because I knew I had a goal in mind, I had no other option than to be disciplined. So a lot of times, even when I could get a time of escape, I had to travel, I had to do things. I had my books with me, I had my flashcards, I was studying on the go. Of course, I took time to rest because rest is productive and I believe so much in that. But I had to be very proactive, very diligent in using my time wisely. Basically, after my 9 to 5, I would take an hour or two to just rest and relax, then go into study mode, study till about 11, then end the day off with a short quiz, doing flashcards. I used the spaced repetition, active recall study methods. There are lots of YouTube videos to show you how to study well and study effectively. You should check them out. I also made a dedicated study schedule to ensure that I was on track with the things I needed to cover per day, per week, per month leading up to the exam. The one thing that I think I could have done better while studying for the MCAT is that I could have started doing practice questions much earlier than I did. I felt that I needed to finish studying the material before I started practicing and doing questions, but that's certainly not the case. I would advise that you start incorporating questions, start getting used to answering questions and tasking your brain. I just feel that it helps you study better. But again, do what works for you if you're in this process. Another thing that I did in transitioning from tech to medicine was getting clinical experience in terms of volunteering and shadowing. So while I was in university, while I was doing my undergrad, I was volunteering at one of the biggest hospitals in my city. And at the time, it wasn't anything complicated. I was working at the front desk. So I was basically first line of contact to visitors coming to the hospital. I coordinated the porter services for patients in dialysis and basically assisted patients in finding their way around the hospital. So whether it was finding a ward or going to a patient's room, I assisted with that. But what this volunteer experience did was help me get my foot in the door and just put myself in that environment that I hoped to be in the future. So I got to see how a hospital runs and operates, visiting hours, the different emotions that visitors come in with, even watching patients on dialysis and just having that appreciation for normal health and life and building empathy, all of those things. That's what the volunteering experience did for me. I also got to do some training sessions while I was there. One of my favorite was a nonviolent crisis intervention training, which is basically just when someone is being violent in the hospital, the things you do, the steps you take, from diffusing the tension to secretly calling for help, or even in a case where you're physically attacked, how to get yourself out of that. Yes, I had to do several physical exercises of getting myself out of a restraint and all of that. It was pretty fun to me. It's another side of medicine that you don't typically see in movies or on TV. So that was fun to actually learn that. So I did that for a little over 2 years. And then in 2024, I did a few months of shadowing at a local clinic. This one was a little more clinically inclined. So for a few hours in a week, I got to shadow general practitioners or family doctors, whichever one you call them, and just follow them while they were doing their work. After getting consent from the patients, I'd get to sit in on some of the clinical cases, the consultations, take my notes. And after each case, I would ask the doctor some questions, debrief. He would explain some things to me. That was really cool because now that I'm in medical school, some of the things I'm learning are related to the cases that I got to observe during my clinical shadowing experience. One of the most useful things that these experiences also taught me was communication. You'd be surprised how much communication absolutely matters in medicine. One thing that the doctors taught me was that good communication helps you build trust with your patients. And when patients trust you, they're more cooperative, they're more willing to take their meds, more pleasant to deal with, and eventually it affects the quality of healthcare that they receive. So yeah, clinical experience, volunteering, shadowing was the third major thing that I did to help my transition from tech to medicine. But that's not to say that if you don't have any clinical or shadow experiences, then it's over for you. Certainly not. One thing I've noticed is that medical schools, they try to look for diverse kind of individuals. Sometimes they understand if you're a non-traditional applicant, you're coming from a different field, you've never had experience in medicine, but your story and the way you tell it in your application matters. For a lot of medical schools, you have to write essays, a personal statement, and things like that to just walk them through your journey and your desire to study medicine. If you're able to explain your why, if you're able to list out your experiences and just the things that make you a holistic individual, I think that you stand a good chance of getting into medical school. So aside from these first three major requirements that I just explained, so that's your MCAT, your GPA, your prerequisite courses, and volunteer and shadow experiences, medical schools also look for other things that you've done in your life. So things like what you've done for work, extracurriculars, if you've done research, what other volunteer experiences have you done? In the area of volunteer experiences, they're also looking for commitment and longevity. So it's not about saying, oh, I volunteered 2 hours in this place and then I volunteered 2 hours in this place. If you have something you've been doing for so long, not being paid for, that's also a good way to show your commitment and longevity. So if it was that you volunteered in the media team in your church for a long time, which I actually did, that also counts as volunteer experience. For work experience, it's basically just taking the things you do in your daily tasks at work and explaining the impact of the work that you do. If you have tangible numbers and KPIs to support that, absolutely include those in your medical school application. For extracurriculars, if you play sports, if you have hobbies like writing, it all goes into your medical school application. The last thing that I want to touch on that I did in my transition from tech to med school was actually something intangible, and that is my mindset. As I explained in a previous video, I got rejected from medical school for 3 years, 3 times, 3 application cycles. But what kept me going was my why, was the mindset. I knew I was doing this for a greater purpose, not the prestige, not the money. I knew my why. And so that kept me really grounded and focused. And that's what helped me keep trying over and over again until I finally got in. Alongside my mindset, I also clearly communicated with the people around me the importance of this thing I was trying to do. So my friends and family knew how important it was for me to get into medical school, for me to pursue this dream. And because they genuinely loved me, they did all they could to support me. And I had to be willing and open to accept that help, but also tell them what I needed from them and how they could help me. I explained to them why I couldn't be at the function several times. I explained why I couldn't take a trip or go to a certain place or be at a certain event. I also told them when I needed help in things like picking up my groceries or making sure I was eating a balanced diet. They were also there in times where they knew I clearly needed a break and forced me to take those breaks. So those two things, the mindset I had plus the people around me, very solid in my transition from tech to medicine. And those two things are still helping me to this day while in med school. So if you're in that process of transitioning from whatever field to medicine, I'd say don't neglect these two things. While you're ticking off all the major boxes, don't forget to always constantly check and renew your mind and involve the people around you. I'm going to end here. This video was just a quick drive-by into the major things that I did for my transition from tech to medicine. If you're looking for a more step-by-step in-depth process or guide, I actually do have a guide that I created for non-traditional applicants who are looking to get into medical school. I will drop the link in my bio. Make sure you check that out. If you're currently in the process of transitioning to medicine, please drop a comment in the comment section. Tell me where your head is at. Tell me if this video has helped you. Ask me any questions you have. If you've already completed this transition, if you're a medical student yourself or you're a medical professional, please say hi in the comment section. Also check out my other YouTube videos, join my newsletter, check me out on other socials, like, share, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.